Commander Vexil's steps echoed in the corridor of the Celestial Seeker, his once vibrant blue scales now dulled and cracked from the long exposure to neglect. The emergency lights, flickering weakly above, cast sharp shadows across the cold, hollow expanse. He had long stopped checking the life support systems. The numbers were as grim as they had been the last time he reviewed them. His crew, what was left of them, was slowly fading away in the shadows of this forsaken ship. Only 12 survived now, all of them weak and all of them aware that time was running out. The mission that had taken them so far beyond known space now felt like a distant, unattainable dream. They were alone, and the Celestial Seeker was nothing more than a tomb, adrift in the silence of the void. 3 cycles, 3 full rotations of the orbiting moon since their engines had failed. The crew had sent out signal after signal, desperate messages into the cold emptiness of space, only to receive nothing in return. The emergency power systems were nearly drained, and each passing hour stretched the crew's resolve thinner. Yet, still they sat together in the dimly lit central chamber, conserving what little oxygen and warmth the ship's systems could offer. Vexil paused at the threshold of the central chamber, the weight of his every step dragging him further into a future he was too proud to accept. Inside, his crew lay sprawled on the floor, some silent and still, others murmuring quietly to one another in weak voices. Their bodies had grown frail, their faces drawn with exhaustion, but their minds still clung to their purpose, however futile it seemed now. He could feel their gazes fall on him, each one carrying a mix of resignation and perhaps an unspoken plea for a miracle. Science Officer Nixara, her voice faint and barely audible, looked up from her resting place against the cold wall. "Commander, how much longer?" she asked, her eyes dull, the blue of her scales nearly faded to gray. Vexil didn't have to check the life support readings. He had memorized them long ago, but it did little to ease the crushing weight of the truth. 20 hours, perhaps less, he responded, his voice steady, yet haunted with an unspoken sorrow. The crew had already said their goodbyes. They had all recorded their final messages, prepared themselves for the inevitable. What remained was only silence, save for the occasional clatter of dying systems and the soft, weak breaths of those who still clung to life. Dr. Krell, their medical officer, moved from one crew member to another, tending to their wounds with hands that had grown less sure with each passing cycle. Vexil stepped beside him, his gaze falling on the young technician who had been running a fever for the last 3 cycles. "How is she?" he asked, his tone quiet, a thread of concern breaking through his usual stoic demeanor. "Stable, for now," Krell replied, his 4-fingered hand gently adjusting the technician's cooling pads. "There's nothing more I can do. The medicines are gone." Vexil nodded, closing his inner eyelids in a brief gesture of respect. They had known from the beginning that rescue was unlikely. Their mission had taken them far from the safety of established trade routes, into the uncharted expanse of space where they had stumbled upon something far beyond their understanding. And now, here they were, abandoned, forgotten by their own people, drifting toward their end. "I wish to make a final log entry," Vexil announced, rising to his full height though his body was no longer as firm and commanding as it once had been. The crew, though weak, watched him with vacant eyes. They had no hope left, only the cold, relentless passage of time. He made his way to the command console, his hand hovering over the activation panel. The system flickered weakly to life, drawing on the last vestiges of emergency power. The console's laser plasma displays cast a dim glow over his face, reflecting the weariness etched into his features. He straightened his back, drawing on every ounce of dignity he could muster. These would be his final words, and he would make them count, even if they would never be heard by anyone. Final log of Commander Vexil, Zinthari Science Vessel, Celestial Seeker, Cycle 457, Standard Galactic Calendar. Our situation remains critical. Life support will fail within the next 20 hours. No response has been received to our distress signals. The crew has performed admirably under these circumstances, upholding the highest traditions of the Zinthari scientific fleet. He paused, his gaze fixed on the flickering display. Was there anything else to say? Any final wisdom to impart to whoever might find this ship years from now? I believe our mission was sabotaged. Vexil continued, lowering his voice, the weight of his suspicions finally breaking through the calm facade he had maintained. The damage to our engines was too deliberate, too calculated to be an accident. I do not know who would want to silence our research, but I suspect it relates to the artifacts we discovered. The truth must be. The sharp crackle of the communication system interrupted him. His sensitive hearing ridges, usually so attuned to the quiet hum of the ship, picked up the subtle change. It was a voice. A voice they had not heard in days. Celestial Seeker, this is Captain Alan Miller of the Earth Alliance ship Dauntless. We've received your distress signal. Hold tight, we're coming to get you. For a moment there was silence. The crew, who had once resigned themselves to their fate, stirred, their tired eyes flicking toward Vexil as a new surge of energy rippled through them. Nixara was the first to react, rushing to the communications console and pressing her hands to the controls. This is Science Officer Nixara of the Celestial Seeker. We read you, Earth Vessel. Our situation is critical. We're tracking your position now. Captain Miller's voice came through, firm and calm. ETA is 45 minutes. Can you hold out that long? Vexil stepped forward, his eyes narrowing. He hadn't expected this. Hadn't allowed himself to hope. It was dangerous to feel anything beyond the grim certainty of their fate. Yet, the words slipped out before he could stop them. Yes, Captain Miller, we can hold out. But we did not expect rescue. There was a brief pause. Then the voice of Captain Miller responded, its warmth carrying a surprising sense of hope. Never leave anyone behind, that's our way. Prepare your crew for emergency evacuation. Our sensors show your hull integrity is compromised in several sections. The words hung in the air, as if the very concept of hope had been too foreign for too long. Vexil turned away from the console, his mind racing. How could these humans, newcomers to interstellar travel, have come all this way to help them? The Zenthari had been abandoned by their own government, left to die in the cold vastness of space. And yet, here was a human captain, offering not just aid, but salvation. Scan for the approaching vessel, Vexil ordered, trying to focus. The shock of it all was overwhelming, but there was no time for hesitation. The Celestial Seeker still had to survive. Confirmed, Commander, the officer replied. Earth Alliance signatures detected. They're approaching at high speed. For the first time in cycles, Vexil felt something stirring inside him. A feeling far too dangerous to trust. It was hope. The Celestial Seeker drifted in the black emptiness of space, its once proud and gleaming hull now marred by the ravages of sabotage. Vexil stood alone in the command center, his thoughts a tangled mess of duty and despair. Every system on the ship was slowly dying, as the ship's power reserves sputtered to nothing. They had been sending distress signals for days, no, for cycles, but had received no response, and now the crew's situation had deteriorated beyond any hope of salvation. There was no one left to save them. The silence in the chamber was oppressive, broken only by the occasional creak of metal under stress, the hum of failing systems, and the faint, almost imperceptible rustle of the crew as they moved in their last moments of life. Their energy, once spent on research and ambition, was now entirely devoted to survival. It was a futile struggle, and even Vexil, the ever-resilient commander, had begun to accept the inevitable. Then, without warning, the console in front of him flickered to life, its laser plasma display suddenly bright against the darkness. The static crackled in a way that set his nerves on edge. A signal. A faint signal. He moved quickly to the console, his heart beating faster with every second that passed. Was this another false hope? Was it just another dead message from some distant corner of the galaxy? He knew better than to hold his breath. But he did anyway. This is Captain Alan Miller of the Earth Alliance ship Dauntless. The voice broke through the static, clearer now. We've received your distress signal. Hold tight, we're coming to get you. Vexil's hand froze above the console, his heart suddenly racing. His eyes darted to the faces of the surviving crew members gathered in the chamber. Some of them had not yet heard the message, their bodies too weak to respond, their minds clouded by fever or exhaustion. Others stirred, barely aware of the world around them, but even they could sense the change in the air. "Commander!" Nixara's weak voice rose above the murmurs, and Vexil turned his attention back to the screen. "I'm here," Vexil said, trying to steady his breath, his mind reeling. "We're getting a response from an Earth vessel." "Earth?" Nixara whispered, as if testing the word, unsure whether it had any meaning in this distant corner of space. "They're just human." "Are they?" Vexil's gaze remained fixed on the display as the Earth captain's voice came again. "We're tracking your position now. ETA 45 minutes. Can you hold out that long?" The words felt unreal. For a moment Vexil considered how fragile hope could be. "Yes," he said, voice steady despite the chaos of his thoughts. "We can hold out." His gaze moved over his crew, whose faces were now lit by the glow of the console. Some looked incredulous, others with barely contained relief, while a few remained unmoved, too worn to react. Their hope, once crushed beneath the weight of their isolation, stirred faintly. Could it be? Could the humans, these newcomers to the galactic stage, actually be coming for them? "Prepare the crew for evacuation," Vexil ordered, the words strange in his mouth. "Gather all critical data and equipment, only what we need." Nixara moved to assist, her hands trembling as she helped direct the others to ready themselves. Despite the brief flicker of hope, Vexil could feel the weight of skepticism pressing down on his chest. How could they trust the Earth Alliance? They were barely known beyond their own sector, considered to be on probation by the Galactic Council. How could such a species, so young and inexperienced, venture out this far to help a Zinthari vessel? As Vexil pondered, Krell, the Zinthari doctor, stood in the doorway, observing. His eyes, though weary, were sharp. "Commander," he said quietly, "the crew, some of them are not ready. There is a chance they won't survive the trip." Vexil nodded, though his thoughts were far away. He had seen the weariness of his people, the slow drain of life from their bodies. But the Dauntless's arrival, however improbable, was their last shot. It had to be enough. Minutes later, the crew was mobilizing, their movements slow but purposeful. Even those too weak to stand were assisted into position, carried by their fellow survivors. Vexil moved to Nixara's side. "The artifacts," he said, voice lowered. "They cannot fall into the hands of the humans yet. We don't know who is behind this sabotage. Not fully." Nixara nodded grimly, glancing at the small secure locker tucked away in the corner of the room. The artifacts were there, hidden, their true significance yet to be uncovered. The mission had always been about research, about discovery, but now it felt like something much darker had been set in motion. The sabotage had been no accident. It had been deliberate, part of a larger plan. And this Earth ship, this Dauntless, might hold the key to uncovering that plan. Or making it worse. "We must be careful," Nixara said. "We don't know what they would do with the knowledge we've found." Vexil turned back to the console, his heart thundering as the laser plasma display showed the blinking coordinates of the approaching vessel. "Keep the artifacts secured," he said, his voice firm yet filled with uncertainty. For now, we wait. As the crew prepared themselves, Commander Vexil couldn't help but feel the weight of his people's survival pressing on his shoulders. Was this truly a rescue? Or was it part of something even more dangerous? Could the Earth Alliance be trusted? Or were they merely the newest players in the game of galactic politics? A game where Zinthari lives were just pawns to be discarded? Suddenly, the Celestial Seeker shuddered as the Dauntless made contact, its docking ports locking into place. Vexil's heart skipped a beat. The sound of the airlock cycling open filled the chamber. His breath caught in his throat as he prepared to face their saviors, or their enemies. Standing in the threshold of the docking bay, Vexil caught sight of the human commander, Captain Miller, who stepped forward with a determined look. Despite his youthful appearance, pale skin, and dark hair, there was an undeniable presence about him. He was, in Vexil's mind, both alien and familiar, a paradox, like the people he had come to save. "Commander Vexil," Captain Miller said, extending his hand in a gesture of greeting. "Let's get your people to safety." Vexil took the offered hand, the touch both foreign and warm, a strange symbol of a new alliance that had yet to be forged. "We are in your debt," Vexil said, his voice steady despite the confusion swirling inside. There was a quiet respect between them, something unspoken. But whether this would be a simple rescue or the beginning of something far greater, only time would tell. As the crew was escorted onto the Dauntless, Vexil allowed himself a fleeting moment of relief. But there was still too much uncertainty. Who were these humans really? And what were they truly after? The door to the Dauntless closed behind them, and for the first time in cycles, the Zenthari crew felt the ship move. No longer adrift, but with a new purpose, their survival now dependent on the fragile cooperation of their mysterious rescuers. And Vexil's mind never stopped racing, haunted by the questions that still lay ahead. The struggle for survival was far from over. The Dauntless had docked with the Celestial Seeker, its heavy airlocks grinding into place with a shudder. The sound reverberated through the hull of the Zenthari vessel, signaling the arrival of a savior that had seemed like a distant dream mere moments ago. Yet as the hatchway opened, the sight before Captain Miller and his crew was anything but what they had expected. The Celestial Seeker's interior was a stark contrast to the gleaming, orderly environment of the Dauntless. It was quiet, too quiet, and the air was thick with the stench of decay. The emergency lights flickered weakly, casting long, harsh shadows over the deteriorating infrastructure. The Zenthari crew, though still alive, appeared as mere ghosts of their former selves, haggard, weak, and drained of color. As Miller's boots clicked against the cold floor, he felt a chill creep up his spine. "This is worse than I imagined," he muttered under his breath. He turned to Darius, who was standing close by, scanning the room with sharp eyes. "Something's not right here," Darius remarked, his voice low and steady. Miller nodded but didn't respond immediately, his eyes scanning the room once again, his thoughts racing. The ship's structure appeared far more fragile than when they first made contact. There were signs of strain on the walls, signs of systems that had been desperately jury-rigged to stay operational. But it was more than just the condition of the ship. There was a weight in the air, an unspoken tension that made Miller uneasy. "Commander Vexil," Miller said, his voice cutting through the haze of confusion, "let's move your people to safety. We need to get them stabilized." Vexil's weary face appeared, his scales dulled and chipped by weeks of suffering. He nodded slowly, as if the effort itself was taxing. "Thank you, Captain Miller," he said, though the gratitude was tempered with something else, something Miller couldn't quite place. The Zenthari commander was a proud species, and Miller knew that accepting help wasn't easy for someone like him. As the crew moved toward the med bay, Miller's first officer, Ryan Weber, spoke up. "Captain, I've been going through the scans of their ship. There's something off about the damage to their engines. This wasn't just an accident." "Sabotage," Miller muttered, his stomach tightening. "That's what I was afraid of." The rescue operation continued, but as the hours dragged on, the situation only became more perplexing. The Dauntless's medical team worked tirelessly, but the signs of neglect were everywhere. Krell, the Zenthari doctor, moved silently between patients, his eyes never meeting the humans, as if the simple act of being in their presence violated some deep-set cultural code. It wasn't just a matter of survival anymore, something far more complicated was at play. "Captain Miller," Vexil said later, his voice gravelly as he approached Miller on the Dauntless Bridge. "I must confess, I've been reconsidering the events that led us here." Miller turned to face him, his expression unreadable. "What do you mean?" Vexil hesitated, his gaze flicking to the far corner of the room, as if searching for the right words. "I believe our mission may have been deliberately sabotaged," he said, lowering his voice as if the walls might be listening. The damage to our ship. It was too precise. Miller's brow furrowed as he absorbed the information. He gestured for Vexiel to sit. Go on. What kind of sabotage are you suggesting? The engines, or propulsion system? It was as if someone knew exactly where to strike. I suspect it's not just a matter of bad luck. I believe someone wanted us stranded, Vexiel explained, his voice gaining strength as he spoke. We were studying anomalies in space, but there were things we found, things that might have drawn attention. Attention from who? Miller asked, his voice quiet but intense. Vexiel's gaze was dark, almost haunted. I can't say for sure. But I know what we uncovered was more than just a simple scientific discovery. There are technologies, ancient technologies, ones that the Galactic Council would prefer remain buried. Ancient technology? Miller echoed, his eyes narrowing. You think this is all about keeping something from the rest of the galaxy? Vexiel paused, then nodded solemnly. That's exactly what I think. I believe the Council doesn't want others to know what we discovered. And that's why we're here. Why they left us to die. Miller was silent for a moment, weighing the enormity of what he had just been told. He had read about the Council, the ancient ruling body that governed so much of galactic politics, but he had never seen firsthand how deeply their influence ran. The Earth Alliance, in comparison, was a mere infant in this vast political system, still carving out its place among the stars. The idea that their discovery could have been so dangerous as to warrant such drastic action was a troubling thought. If you're right, Miller said, breaking the silence, then we've got a lot more than a simple rescue mission on our hands. Vexiel's eyes hardened. We do, he agreed. And if we don't act quickly, the truth will be buried, and so will we. Meanwhile, Nixara, who had quietly overheard the conversation from the doorway, approached Vexiel. She, too, was beginning to feel the weight of the situation pressing on her. Commander, what are we going to do? She asked, her voice barely above a whisper. If we share everything with them, we don't know who we can trust. Vexiel turned to her, his expression grim. I know, Nixara, but we don't have much choice now. If we stay silent, we'll die here, and the knowledge we've uncovered will vanish with us. The Council will ensure it. Nixara nodded, though the uncertainty was still etched into her features. I'll prepare the data, she said quietly. But we have to be careful. We have no idea who might be watching us. As the Dauntless continued to receive the Zenthari crew into their medical bays, and the survivors began to stabilize, Miller began to make plans for the next steps. The sabotage was just the beginning. The more he thought about what Vexiel had shared, the more it seemed like this mission was far from over. In the meantime, the Dauntless crew began to conduct their own investigation into the Celestial Seeker's damage. It didn't take long before Catherine Reeves, the chief engineer, and her team discovered something that couldn't be ignored. As they analyzed the systems, they found traces of advanced tampering. The damage wasn't random. It wasn't a failure of design or function. It was the result of a calculated, methodical attack. We're looking at sabotage of the highest order here, Catherine said, her voice tight with disbelief. The Zenthari didn't just have a malfunction. They were hit by someone who knew exactly what they were doing. Miller's mind raced as he absorbed the implications of her findings. This wasn't just a rescue. This was a conspiracy that threatened to reshape everything they knew about the galaxy, and the Dauntless had stumbled right into the heart of it. As he turned back toward the laser plasma display, his mind was already whirring with the possibilities of what came next. The Celestial Seeker had brought them more than just survivors. It had brought them a mystery that was far more dangerous than anyone had imagined. The stakes had just been raised. The Dauntless had barely begun to settle into the quiet of the void when the realization dawned. This was no ordinary rescue mission. The signs of sabotage aboard the Celestial Seeker were not random. It wasn't just a series of mechanical failures. The precise nature of the damage was too deliberate to be dismissed as coincidence. As the crew sifted through the wreckage of the Zenthari ship, the pieces began to fit together. each revelation more chilling than the last. "Captain," Catherine Reeves said, her voice low, tight with concern as she examined the scans again. Her fingers moved swiftly across the display panel, the glow of the laser plasma display illuminating her face. "This wasn't just a malfunction. It looks like someone knew exactly where to hit them. The engines were sabotaged in a way that guarantees they couldn't escape." Miller leaned over the console, narrowing his eyes as he processed the data. His suspicion, once a vague sense of unease, was now crystallizing into something far darker. Someone wanted them stranded. They didn't just fail. They were made to fail. Catherine nodded grimly, her face tense with the enormity of what they were uncovering. "But that's not the only problem. I've been going through the data cores they found. Whatever these Zenthari discovered, it's not something they were supposed to bring back. I'm seeing schematics, tech we don't recognize, and fragments of old designs. This could change everything." Ryan Weber, who had been quiet until now, spoke up, his tone serious. "Old designs? How old?" "Older than any of the council races," Catherine replied, glancing up at him. "This isn't something any species should have access to. The implications, if this technology gets into the wrong hands, it could shift the entire balance of power in the galaxy." Miller's gaze hardened as the pieces began to fall into place. He had been briefed on the political landscape, but the gravity of what Catherine was suggesting went beyond anything he had expected. The Galactic Council, an ancient and powerful organization, had kept control over galactic technology for millennia. If what they had discovered was truly beyond the reach of the Council, then there was more at stake than just a rescue mission. "We need to get this information back to Earth," Miller said, his voice firm, though a shadow of doubt crossed his mind. Would they even be able to return with this? And what would the Council do to prevent it? Catherine and Ryan exchanged a brief glance, both understanding the weight of Miller's words. "We'll keep it contained," Catherine reassured him. "For now." "Keep what contained?" Vexiel's voice interrupted, as the Zenthari commander entered the room, his posture still stiff despite the weakening of his frame. He had been listening from the doorway, and his presence immediately drew the attention of the room. "Commander Vexiel," Miller said, turning to face him, "we've been going through the data you brought with you. Your crew's research, it's beyond what we expected." Vexiel stiffened, his eyes narrowing as he stepped forward. "What do you mean by beyond what you expected?" Ryan shifted uncomfortably but chose his words carefully. "We've uncovered evidence that the damage to your ship was deliberate. Someone went to great lengths to ensure your mission would fail." "Sabotage," Vexiel muttered under his breath, his face darkening. "I suspected as much," Miller nodded. "And we believe that's just the start of it. The technology your crew uncovered, it's unlike anything the Council would allow anyone to develop. We're talking about designs older than the Council itself. They would do anything to keep this from reaching the wider galaxy." Vexiel's gaze flickered with a mix of frustration and understanding. "I had hoped it wasn't true, that we had just made an error, that our systems failed on their own. But now, I see. They wanted to bury what we found." He paused, rubbing the back of his neck as if the weight of his thoughts was almost too much to bear. "The Council will not let this go. If they discover that we're alive, they will stop at nothing to erase all evidence of our research. And that's why we can't let it fall into their hands," Miller said, his voice low and steady. "But we can't keep this quiet much longer. The Dauntless is a human ship, and you and your crew are, well, let's just say the Council doesn't like Earth poking around their business." Nixara, who had been silent in the background, stepped forward now, her voice measured but firm. "We have to move quickly. If the Council's military is already hunting us, then it's only a matter of time before they come for us. The Celestial Seeker was too far out on its own for them to track, but now, with the Dauntless involved, we've made ourselves a target." Vexiel's eyes hardened. "They will come," he said, his voice icy. "And they won't stop until they've silenced us for good." As if on cue, the ship's alert system chimed, a shrill sound that cut through the tense air. Miller's heart skipped a beat as the head-up display flared to life. The Xanthari military ships had arrived. 3 vessels, Weber reported, his fingers flying across the controls as the sensor readings popped up. And they're broadcasting Xanthari military codes. Miller cursed under his breath. It hadn't taken long for the council to take notice. "Captain," Nixara said, her voice tight. "They won't be here for a rescue. They're here to ensure that no one learns what we've found." Catherine looked at the display, her brows furrowed. "We can't outrun them in this ship. And if they're targeting the Dauntless now, we'll be in a much worse position." Miller turned to Vexel, his expression grim. "How much time do we have before they close in on us?" Vexil's eyes scanned the data, his mind working quickly despite his exhaustion. 40 minutes, at best. That was the moment when it hit Miller. This was no longer just about surviving. The Dauntless and the Xanthari crew were caught in a fight for something far greater than their individual survival. They were fighting for the knowledge that had been suppressed for centuries, and the stakes were higher than either side had imagined. "We need to move fast," Miller said, his tone decisive. "Prepare for evasive maneuvers. We're not going down without a fight." The room buzzed with the urgency of the moment. The sabotage, the political ramifications, and now the threat of the Xanthari military closing in. Everything had escalated in a matter of moments. The conspiracy was unfolding faster than Miller had expected, and he knew that soon they would be forced to make a choice. They could either fight, or they could give up everything that had been discovered. As the Dauntless prepared to face the incoming Xanthari ships, Miller looked at Vexil, his resolve hardening. "We're in this together now. There's no turning back." Vexil nodded, his face solemn. "Then let us fight together, Captain. Let's finish what we started." The Dauntless jolted violently as the Xanthari warships closed in, their weapons' fire erupting in bursts of brilliant energy that carved through the dark void. The bridge crew scrambled, their movements sharp and precise, but there was no denying the sheer power of the approaching enemy forces. 3 Xanthari warships had emerged from FTL, their sleek predatory shapes looming like shadows against a cold backdrop of space. The Dauntless was outgunned, outmanned, and dangerously out of time. Ryan Weber's voice cut through the chaos. "The Xanthari have us in their sights. They're preparing to fire again." Miller's eyes flicked to the heads-up display where the targeting locks on their ship blinked red. "Damn it," he muttered, fists clenched. He had known this was coming, but nothing could have prepared him for the speed with which it unfolded. "Can we evade them?" Catherine Reeves was already working the console, her fingers flying across the keys. "The ship's thrusters are at maximum, but these warships are designed for pursuit. We'll never outrun them." "We don't need to outrun them," Miller replied. "We need to make them hesitate." "Catherine, is the sensor ghost protocol active?" "On standby," she answered, voice tense but controlled. "I'll trigger it. On your mark." Miller took a deep breath, his mind racing through options as the bridge vibrated again from another enemy blast. "We'll need more than that. We're not just facing a threat to the Dauntless. We're facing the Council's wrath. We're a symbol now, a target." Vexil, standing to the side, his tired form rigid, finally spoke. "Captain, if I may," he said, his voice low but resolute. "The Council will not let this go. They will destroy us, and anyone who helps us, without hesitation. I believe we're not just dealing with military power but political maneuvering as well. You may not understand the full significance of what's at stake, but I do." Miller turned to the Xanthari commander, his gaze intense. "Then tell me, what exactly are we dealing with?" Vexil hesitated for a moment before responding. "What my crew uncovered is far more than ancient technology. It's something that could shift the balance of power across the entire galaxy. The Xanthari Council has kept this knowledge suppressed for millennia. If they believe that information is leaking, they will stop at nothing to silence us." Miller's eyes hardened, but he gave a slight nod. "Then we're not just fighting to survive. We're fighting for something much larger. We need a plan, now." As the Zinthari warships closed in, their powerful guns charging, Miller glanced at his crew. We have to split their attention. Catherine, activate the sensor ghost protocol and get us into the asteroid field. Darius, I need a defensive perimeter around the ship, now. Ryan, prepare for evasive maneuvers. We're going to make them regret ever coming after us. Without waiting for a response, Miller turned to the view screen. His heart pounded in his chest as the first volley of energy blasts from the Zinthari ships ripped through the empty space, trailing fiery arcs across the distance. The Dauntless shuddered under the force of the hit, and sparks flew from several terminals as the shields buckled under pressure. Shields holding at 78%, Darius reported from his station, his voice tight but steady. We're going to need more than that, Miller said, jaw clenched. Hold steady. Catherine, engage the protocol now. The ship's systems hummed with activity as the sensor ghost protocol activated, sending out false signals across a wide array of frequencies. Multiple decoys mimicked the Dauntless's engine signature, confusing the Zinthari targeting systems. We've got them, Catherine said, her voice a mix of relief and anxiety. They're firing at multiple targets. Keep them guessing, Miller ordered, his voice calm despite the rising tension. He could feel the eyes of his crew on him, waiting for the next move. He had no choice now but to push forward. Another blast rocked the Dauntless and the ship veered sharply to the left, narrowly avoiding a direct hit. Evasive maneuvers, now, Miller barked. The Dauntless twisted through the asteroid field, the massive rock scattered across the region, offering a small but essential cover. The Zinthari ships followed, their weapons still firing, but their accuracy now compromised by the interference from the sensor decoys and the unpredictable movements of the Dauntless. Distance to the nearest Zinthari ship? Miller asked, eyes fixed on the tactical display. 20 seconds, Ryan answered. They're splitting up, trying to flank us. They're adapting quickly, Miller muttered. We need to change tactics, get us closer to the gas giant, use its radiation belt to mask our signature. Catherine's fingers flew across her console, her face illuminated by the glow of the heads-up display. Engines at maximum will enter the radiation field in 5. Make it quick, Miller urged. He glanced over at Vexil, whose expression remained stoic despite the violence around them. Vexil, are you ready to trust us? The Zinthari commander met his gaze, the weight of the decision hanging heavy between them. After a long pause, he finally nodded. Yes, for now. Miller's lips curled into a tight smile. Then let's finish this. As the Dauntless hurtled toward the gas giant, the ship's engines powered to full capacity and the crew braced for impact with the radiation belt. The Zinthari ships, closing in on all sides, were too slow to adjust their course in time. We've lost them, Ryan reported, as the Dauntless plunged into the dense cloud of charged particles, the ship's signature now nearly undetectable to enemy scanners. Miller allowed himself a brief moment of relief, but there was no time to savor it. The Zinthari fleet had been forced to abandon the pursuit for now, but Miller knew this was only a temporary reprieve. Catherine, what's our next move? He asked, his voice grim. We'll need to find a way to get out of here without them tracking us, she replied, glancing at the scanner readings. But they'll regroup. It's just a matter of time before they come after us again. Miller nodded, his thoughts already racing. They were far from safe, but for now, they had bought themselves some time. Suddenly a voice broke through the tension. Captain Miller, Vexil said, his tone laced with urgency. You don't understand. This is just the beginning. The Zinthari military will never stop hunting us. And the truth we carry, if we don't stop them first, it will be lost forever. Miller turned to face him, understanding the gravity of his words. The stakes were higher than they had ever imagined. If they were going to survive, they needed to act swiftly and decisively. The conspiracy was real, and the fight for the galaxy's future had only just begun. We'll make it, Miller said, his voice firm. And we'll make sure the truth gets out, no matter the cost. As the ship moved through the gas giant's radiation belt, the crew gathered, knowing that the true test was only just beginning. They had survived the first wave, but now they had to outwit a relentless enemy determined to bury the truth at any cost. The Dauntless drifted into the shadows of a dense asteroid field, the eerie stillness of space swallowing the sound of its movements. The Zinthari ships had retreated, temporarily. Their weapons were silent for now, but Miller knew better than to trust this quiet. It was only a lull before the next wave of conflict, and the time to make a decision had arrived. The threat from the Zinthari military was growing by the minute, and the alliance they had forged with the Zinthari crew was their only hope. "We can't keep running forever," Captain Miller said, his voice a low murmur as he stared at the starless void outside the window. His thoughts were miles away, calculating their next move. "We need a plan that involves more than just evasion. We need to hit back, and we need to hit hard." Vexiel stood beside him, his figure tense, his eyes distant. The Zinthari commander had not yet fully committed to this fragile alliance. There was a wariness in his posture, a resistance to fully trust the humans despite their shared goals. But the silence between them spoke volumes. It was a moment of reflection, a shared understanding of the stakes that neither of them could afford to ignore. "We have no choice," Vexiel finally said, his voice almost a whisper. "The Zinthari leadership is already preparing for the next phase of the operation. They will come for us, and they will not stop until every trace of our discovery is erased." Miller turned to face him, his eyes hard with determination. "And we'll stop them. Together." Vexiel didn't respond immediately. His gaze flickered to the laser plasma display before him, tracking the data feeds from the ship's scanners. "We cannot fight the Zinthari alone. We need to share our technology, our knowledge. The Dauntless may be powerful, but against an enemy this advanced, we'll need more than just weapons." Catherine Reeves entered the bridge, her hands slick with the faint residue of alien technology. "He's right, Captain. I've been working on the artifacts we retrieved from the Celestial Seeker," she said, her voice strained from hours of nonstop work. "There's something here. The technology, it's far beyond anything we've ever seen, but if we can figure out how to use it, it could give us the edge we need." Nixara, the Zinthari science officer, stepped forward, her eyes scanning the display as she joined the conversation. "We've been studying the same data. There's something hidden in the codes, something we couldn't understand at first, but now it's clear." She paused, glancing at Vexiel for approval. He nodded silently. "We have the potential to create something that could defend us," Nixara continued, her voice steady. "But we'll need help from the humans. This is uncharted territory for us. And the risks—" "We're in this together now," Miller interrupted, his voice cutting through the tension. "We share what we know. The Zinthari may have kept this technology secret for thousands of years, but now it's ours. We can't afford secrets anymore." Vexiel's jaw tightened, but there was something almost resembling agreement in his gaze. "We do this on our terms, Captain. We use what we have to survive." Miller nodded, sensing the shift. It wasn't complete trust, not yet, but it was a step forward. The uneasy alliance between their crews would be tested in the coming days. But for now, they had a common enemy, and that was enough. On the bridge, Catherine had already begun pulling up data from the alien artifacts, her eyes flicking between the readings and the display. The Zinthari ships. "There's something in their targeting systems. We can disable their weapons, their shields. If we can get close enough and deploy a specific frequency, we could cripple their defenses long enough to make a move." Vexiel's eyes narrowed as he studied the readout. "You mean we could hack their systems?" Catherine smiled tightly. "Not exactly, more like a tactical interference, a disruption in their frequencies. We won't need to breach their security systems. We'll use their own tech against them." The tension in the room grew, each person aware of the fragile thread upon which their survival hung. "We'll need to get close to them first," Ryan Weber said, his voice calm but filled with urgency. "They'll detect us long before we're in range." "We'll use the Celestial Seeker as a decoy," Vexiel suggested, the idea taking root in his mind. "We'll make them think we're still stranded, that we're weak and vulnerable. The Dauntless can be our strike force when the time is right." Miller was quiet for a moment, contemplating the plan. "It's risky. The Seeker is in no shape to play a decoy, but if it buys us time, it could work." The crew exchanged glances, each person weighing the cost of such a decision. Finally, Miller spoke. "We'll do it. Get your team ready, Vexil. We move in 2 hours." As they set the plan into motion, a quiet tension settled over the Dauntless. The Zenthari crew, led by Nixara, had begun working on decoding the technology further, each of them aware of how little they truly understood. The collaboration with the humans was beginning to show promise, but the air between them was thick with uncertainty. No one knew if this alliance would hold, or if the trust between them would fracture the moment the real test arrived. On the Celestial Seeker, the Zenthari crew worked silently, their heads down as they reviewed the data and prepared the ship to act as bait. Vexil, however, found it impossible to push the doubts from his mind. His people, for all their pride and advanced knowledge, were not ready to face the full scope of what lay ahead. They had lived under the shadow of the Council's dominance for far too long. "I've made the right choice," he muttered to himself, though the words offered him little comfort. "We must trust them. If we don't, we all fall." Nixara approached him, her expression unreadable. "Commander, you're sure about this? We're risking everything, trusting them." Vexil met her gaze, his inner turmoil masked by a calm exterior. "Yes. We have no other choice. We must do this. For the future." Nixara nodded, her resolve hardening as she returned to her task. The delicate balance between trust and distrust would guide their every decision from here on out. As the Dauntless and Celestial Seeker prepared for their next move, the crew's uneasy alliance held steady, at least for now. But Miller knew better than to believe it was permanent. The enemy was coming, and when they arrived, it would be more than just a fight for survival. It would be a fight for the future of the galaxy itself. "Enemy contact, Captain," shouted the tactical officer, her fingers dancing across the laser plasma display as the red alerts blared across the bridge. "Zenthari fleet is closing in fast. At least 5 warships, all with heavy artillery." Miller's gaze snapped to the screen, his eyes hardening as he took in the numbers. The Zenthari were relentless. The temporary lull they'd enjoyed was nothing more than a false calm. "What's their distance?" 5 minutes, until they're within firing range," came the answer, cold and fast. Miller's mind raced, thoughts spiraling as he calculated their options. They'd known this was coming. The Zenthari wouldn't let them escape without a fight, not after everything they'd learned. "Catherine, deploy the sensor ghost protocol. Get us a moment of confusion. Ryan, prepare evasive maneuvers. We can't let them get a clean shot." "We're ready," Ryan Weber replied with grim determination, already keying in commands into the heads-up display. "But they're faster than we are. We won't be able to outrun them." "We don't need to outrun them, we need to outthink them," Miller retorted, his voice sharp. "Activate all defensive systems. Darius, get security on high alert. They'll board us if they get the chance." The Dauntless shuddered violently as the first volley of energy weapons impacted their shields. The sound of the blast reverberated through the hull, and the bridge crew was thrown momentarily off balance. Sparks flew from several panels, and the emergency lighting flickered briefly before stabilizing. "We're taking hits," the communications officer reported, her voice laced with panic. "Shields are at 60%. Direct impact on the port side." "Damn it," Miller growled. "Get those shields back up." The tactical officer, focused on the data, adjusted the settings. "We're being targeted by their missile systems. They've adapted to our movements. Our tactics aren't working anymore." Catherine's fingers flew over her console, bringing up new configurations on the display. "I'm activating the modified countermeasures. We've got a small window before their targeting systems adapt further. We need to hit them first." Miller nodded grimly, his mind racing as the ship rocked again from another blast. The tension in the air was suffocating. "Ryan, take us in close. We'll make them think we're vulnerable. Catherine, deploy the new tech as soon as we're in range." A tense silence hung between them as they approached the enemy fleet, each second stretching into an eternity. The Zenthari ships loomed like towering predators, their weapon systems primed and ready to tear the Dauntless apart. "Steady," Miller muttered, his hand gripping the armrest of his command chair. Suddenly, the Dauntless lurched violently as the ship veered to the left, narrowly avoiding another barrage of fire. The ship's weapons flared to life, targeting the nearest Xanthari warship with a calculated barrage of its own. The space around them erupted into chaotic bursts of light as explosions lit up the dark void. "Direct hit on their starboard side," Ryan reported, his voice strained. "We've taken down their shields, but they're still coming." "Don't stop now," Miller barked. "Catherine, get those countermeasures online." The laser plasma displays in front of her flickered as Catherine inputted the commands. Within seconds, a dazzling array of energy pulses erupted from the Dauntless, enveloping the Xanthari warships in a web of interference. The enemy's weapons systems were briefly thrown into disarray, their targeting systems overloaded by the unexpected burst of countermeasures. "We've disrupted their targeting," Catherine shouted, but the victory was fleeting. "It's only temporary. They'll adapt quickly." "We'll buy ourselves more time," Miller said, his voice unwavering as he tightened his grip on the chair. "Ryan, keep them distracted. I want to see them scrambling." Ryan's eyes flicked over to the sensor readout as he executed another evasive maneuver, the Dauntless darting sharply to the right. "They're firing again. Direct hit to our aft thrusters." The Dauntless lurched once more and alarms blared across the bridge. Red lights flashed in rapid succession as the hull groaned under the pressure of the incoming attacks. Systems began to fail. Auxiliary power flickered, and the lights dimmed for a split second before the emergency lights took over. "Shields are down to 40%, Captain," Darius called from his station. "We're getting overwhelmed. The Xanthari have us cornered." "We can't let them board," Miller said, his jaw clenched. He glanced over at Vexil, who stood silent at the side of the bridge, watching the battle unfold. "Commander, what's your take?" Vexil's sharp gaze never wavered from the screen as he processed the situation. "The Xanthari military will adapt. They are relentless and will stop at nothing to ensure your destruction. They've been learning from their mistakes." Miller nodded grimly. "Then we can't afford to let them get comfortable. Catherine, hit them with everything we've got. Full weapon systems. Let's make them regret this." The Dauntless unleashed its full arsenal. Beams of concentrated energy lashed out at the nearest Xanthari warship, striking its hull with a tremendous force that caused a brilliant flash of light. For a brief moment it seemed as though they might have struck a decisive blow, but the moment passed too quickly. The Xanthari ship continued its advance, their weapons charging for another volley. "We've got incoming," Ryan warned, his voice tense. "This is going to be close." The Dauntless weaved between the asteroids in a desperate bid to avoid the concentrated barrage that followed. A direct hit struck their starboard side, sending a shudder through the entire vessel. The internal alarms screamed in their ears as the ship shook violently. The damage to the outer hull was significant, compromising their maneuvering thrusters. "We can't keep dodging forever," Miller muttered, his mind racing for a solution. "Catherine, adjust our trajectory. Let's use the asteroid field again. This time, we're using it as cover." "Already on it," she replied quickly, her fingers moving swiftly. "We're closing in on the next group of asteroids." The Dauntless plunged once again into the debris field, its every movement sharp and calculated as the Xanthari ships followed in pursuit. The massive rocks offered precious seconds of cover as the crew scrambled to stabilize their systems. "Shields are at 25%, Darius reported. "We won't last much longer." The tension on the bridge was unbearable, the fight growing ever more desperate with each passing moment. The Xanthari were relentless, adapting to every move they made. Despite their temporary advantage, Miller knew the battle was far from won. They had managed to inflict some damage, but at what cost? Could they really hold out against the might of the Xanthari fleet? "We need to think of something big and fast," Miller muttered, his mind a whirlwind of possibilities. The stakes had shifted. This wasn't just a fight for survival. It was a battle to change the course of galactic history. As the battle raged on, one question echoed in Miller's mind. Could the Dauntless hold its ground against the full might of the Xanthari fleet? Or was this just the beginning of a far darker struggle? "Captain, the Xanthari are closing in again." Ryan Weber's voice cut through the tension like a knife. "They've gathered reinforcements, more ships, more weapons." Miller turned sharply, his gaze scanning the rapidly shifting data on the laser plasma display. The looming danger of the Xanthari military was now undeniable. The long, drawn-out battle was nearing its peak. They had no more time to waste. We're out of options, Captain. Catherine's voice rang from across the room, urgent and firm. The Dauntless can't take another sustained bombardment. We're operating on fumes here. Systems are failing, and we've still got to unleash the technology. Miller nodded grimly, his brow furrowed in thought. The forbidden technology, what the Xanthari had uncovered, what could change everything. Was there only hope? They had to use it now, before Xanthari Commander Zorax could do any more damage. Vexiel, standing near the command center, had been silent for the past few minutes, his eyes locked on the sensor feeds. His mind was clearly elsewhere, analyzing the situation, searching for the smallest advantage they could exploit. Finally, he spoke, his voice as resolute as ever. We have to act before they gain any more ground. Zorax is closing in, and he won't stop until we're dead. Miller didn't need to hear more. He understood Zorax's resolve. The ruthless commander was as determined to crush the Earth crew as the Xanthari forces had been to suppress the Xanthari research. They had to be clever, or they wouldn't make it out alive. We deploy the technology now, Miller said, his tone hardening as he turned to his officers. Get us to the center of the battlefield, we're going to draw them in. Ryan Weber quickly adjusted their heading. The Dauntless shifted course, aiming directly at the heart of the approaching Xanthari fleet. Miller could feel the weight of every decision now resting on his shoulders. This would be their last stand. Status on the technology? Miller asked Catherine, his voice urgent. Ready to deploy, Captain, she replied, her fingers flying across the controls, configuring the new system they had integrated into the Dauntless after hours of tense cooperation. Once we make the jump, the whole fleet will feel it. It's going to be a hell of a ride. The ship's engines rumbled as they powered through the void of space, pushing against the overwhelming pressure that was building from all sides. Xanthari warships surged forward, their sleek forms cutting through the blackness with menacing speed, eager to finish what they had started. The calm before the storm had long since passed, and now it was a race to see who would break first. Get us in close, Miller ordered, his eyes locked onto the incoming enemy vessels. I want to make them think we're running out of time. We're within range, Captain, Ryan called out, sweat trickling down his face. He knew what this meant. This was their moment to strike. In the depths of the ship, Vexiel's crew was working quickly, the Xanthari scientists already preparing the forbidden data and technology to release its full potential. It was a gamble, but it was the only one they had. The Xanthari had learned to adapt, but now it was their turn to learn from the mistakes they had made. Deploying in 3, 2, 1, Catherine's voice was calm, but Miller could hear the slight edge of tension creeping through. The Dauntless lurched as the forbidden technology activated, a surge of energy flooding the system. The ship's shields flared brightly, a wave of force rippling outward in all directions, and for a brief moment, the Xanthari forces faltered. A powerful pulse of energy, unlike anything seen before, radiated across the battlefield, disrupting the Xanthari ship's weapon systems. We've got them, Catherine shouted, her voice full of awe. The Xanthari ships were momentarily blinded, their targeting systems scrambling as they tried to recover. Miller's heart raced as he saw the gap they had been waiting for. The Xanthari fleet, disoriented and vulnerable, was now within their grasp. Ryan, fire everything we've got, Miller ordered. The Dauntless fired its weapons with incredible force, the energy beams striking the weakened Xanthari ships with devastating accuracy. Explosions rippled across the enemy lines as the Dauntless tore through the chaos, cutting through the heart of their fleet. We've hit their flagship, Ryan shouted, his hands dancing over the controls as the bridge trembled with the force of the impact. They're on the defensive, but just as the tide seemed to turn in their favor, a new danger emerged. A dark shape appeared from behind a nearby asteroid cluster. A Xanthari warship, larger and more heavily armed than the others. It emerged from the shadows like a predator hunting its prey, its weapons powered and ready. It's Zorax, Vexiel's voice rang through the bridge. He's coming for us. Miller's stomach tightened. Zorax wouldn't be deterred. The flagship had taken hits, but the fleet commander was relentless, refusing to accept defeat. The Dauntless was still vulnerable, its shields worn thin from the barrage. Zorax knew this, and would strike the fatal blow if they didn't act quickly. "We can't let him get the upper hand," Miller said, his voice steady with determination. "Catherine, adjust the targeting systems to counter his movements. We can't afford another hit like that." Catherine adjusted the systems, her fingers flying over the controls, feeding new data into the Dauntless's combat systems. The ship surged forward, slipping through the chaos like a knife through butter, aiming directly for Zorax's flagship. The two ships collided in a final, decisive confrontation. The Dauntless fired at full force, every weapon system unleashed, striking Zorax's ship with brutal force. Zorax retaliated, unleashing waves of destruction in an attempt to turn the battle in his favor. "Shields are at critical," Darius shouted, his voice tight with strain as the Dauntless rocked from another blast. "We need a miracle, Captain." Miller's eyes narrowed, his resolve hardening. "We're not out yet." The Zenthari flagship's shields flickered and then failed under the relentless barrage. The ship's weapons went silent, and Zorax's flagship finally came to a halt, listing dangerously as smoke poured from its broken hull. The Dauntless had done the impossible. They had crippled the flagship. "We did it," Ryan said, his voice filled with disbelief. "They're done." But Miller knew better. Zorax's defeat was only part of the equation. The true battle, the fight for the future of the galaxy, was still to come. "We've won this battle," Miller said slowly, watching the Zenthari fleet begin to retreat. "But the war is far from over." Mexiel stood next to him, his expression unreadable as the remnants of the Zenthari fleet pulled back into the void. The stakes had shifted. The Galactic Council's iron grip on power had been shaken. What had begun as a desperate rescue mission had become a full-fledged revolution. "Now, we finish what we started," Vexiel said quietly. As the Dauntless drifted in the aftermath of the battle, Miller couldn't help but feel a sense of finality. They had struck a blow to the Zenthari military, and the Galactic Council was beginning to feel the weight of their resistance. Victory was theirs, for now. But the road ahead would be long and fraught with uncertainty. As he looked out at the stars, Miller knew that the revolution had just begun. The silence after the battle was almost deafening. The faint remnants of the last exchange still lingered in the air, the broken vessels of the Zenthari fleet floating motionless as the Dauntless drifted in the aftermath. For a moment, it felt as though time itself had stopped, everything that had led to this point now coming to an uneasy, unresolved stillness. But that silence also carried with it a promise, a turning point. Captain Miller stood at the observation window, his gaze focused on the stars. His hands were clasped behind his back, his shoulders weary but standing tall. The battle had been fought, and the stakes had never been higher. They had won, but the war, he knew, was far from over. "We've done it," said Elena Martinez softly, her voice breaking through the quiet. "We've really done it." Miller didn't turn to face her. He could hear the awe in her voice, but the weight of everything was pressing on him. This was the moment that would change the galaxy forever. But it didn't feel like a victory. At least not in the way he had imagined it. "What now?" he finally said, his voice low but filled with resolve. "Do we just sit back and wait for the galaxy to see what we've done?" Elena came to stand beside him, her eyes scanning the room where officers, crew, and Zenthari survivors alike had gathered, trying to comprehend the enormity of what had just happened. There was no immediate answer, no easy way forward. The Galactic Council had been dealt a blow, but they were far from defeated. Their control of the galaxy had been shaken, but they still held a vast network of influence that would not give up easily. "The next steps are just as important as the battle we fought today," Elena said quietly, the weight of the truth sinking in. "We've made enemies today, Captain, and we've made allies. But the Galactic Council isn't going to let this go. They'll come after us with everything they have." Miller nodded slowly. He knew this. He had seen the political games, the suppression of knowledge, the manipulation of power. The revolution had begun, yes, but it would take more than firepower and tactics to bring down the powers that had held the galaxy in their iron grip for millennia. Axel stood near the back of the room, his posture stiff, his eyes distant as he looked out the window toward the debris of the Zenthari fleet. He had come a long way. His people had come a long way, since the days when they had been at the mercy of the Galactic Council. Now, standing here alongside the humans who had saved them, it was impossible not to think about what they had lost, and what they stood to gain. The Zenthari people will not forget this day, Vexiel said quietly, his deep voice filled with the weight of responsibility. We have broken free from the chains that bound us to the Council, but the cost has been high. Many of our own have fallen. He turned toward Miller, his expression unreadable but his eyes sharp. The question is not whether we are ready for the fight ahead, but whether we are ready to stand against the forces we've unleashed. Our enemies will not take this lightly. Miller turned to face him, his expression solemn. I don't expect an easy road, Vexiel, but we don't have the luxury of waiting anymore. The fight for freedom has already begun. The crew of the Dauntless had grown close to the Zenthari in the days leading up to the battle. They had shared their hopes, their fears, and now, as they stood side by side, there was a sense of understanding between them, an unspoken agreement that the war against the Council was not theirs to fight alone. We will help you, Vexiel, Miller said, his voice firm with resolve. We'll stand together. The galaxy will know that there's a new force rising, and we won't let them destroy what we've fought for. Vexiel inclined his head in acknowledgement. I trust you, Captain, but our people are still divided. Not all of them see the same path that you and I do. There will be resistance, even from within. It's a danger we must face. We face it together, Miller replied, his tone resolute. In the command room, Catherine Reeves and Ryan Weber were already working, analyzing the data that had been gathered during the final stages of the battle. The forbidden technology they had uncovered, once suppressed by the Council, now lay in their hands. A powerful tool, but one whose full potential had yet to be unlocked. The technology's incredible, Captain, Catherine said, her eyes glued to the heads-up display. But it's not just about what we've found. It's about how we use it. And right now, the Zenthari military has no idea what we've learned. But they will. We can't let them get their hands on this, Ryan added, his eyes scanning through tactical data. It's not just a matter of power. This could shift the entire balance of the galaxy. Miller nodded, feeling the weight of their words. This wasn't just about one battle or one victory. It was about ensuring that the knowledge they had uncovered would never fall into the wrong hands again. The stakes had been raised, and the future was uncertain. But Miller was ready. They were ready. As the crew gathered in the observation room, Vexiel stood beside Miller, both of them staring out into the stars, lost in thought. The silence was no longer the heavy, suffocating silence of defeat. It was a silence full of possibilities. The galaxy had been forever changed, and now the new alliance stood at the precipice of a new era. We have our work cut out for us, Vexiel said, his voice thoughtful. But we are not alone. Miller turned to him, a small smile playing at the corner of his lips. No, we're not. And as they stood together, side by side, they knew that this was just the beginning of something much larger. Something that would take years to unfold. Something that would require every ounce of strength they had. But it was a future they could face. Together. The Dauntless slowly turned toward the distant horizon, its engines humming with the quiet promise of hope. They had won the battle, but the revolution was just beginning. The galaxy would never be the same. The Council's hold on power had been cracked, and with each passing day, the cracks would grow deeper. For the first time in a long time, the future seemed full of possibility.